Well, the outbreak doesn't look as though it's increasing rapidly. The Germans and the Europeans think it may well have peaked, but of course, because there's an incubation period between being exposed and falling ill, which might be as long as 2 weeks, the outbreak will look as though it's going on, look as though it's increasing in size, when in fact perhaps the suspect food, whatever that is, has been taken off the market. Only time will tell.
We know about these kidney complications. It's a new strain. Is it a more vicious strain?
Well, so far it looks as though it may well be. I think we'll have to wait and see until all the dust has settled before we can be certain of that. But it certainly is as nasty as any of these particular kinds of E. coli that we've seen in the past. The proportion of people getting the hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is the kidney complication, affects the blood and goes on sometimes to affect the brain and the heart, seems to be really quite high in this outbreak. In fact, very high in this outbreak, and it's affecting people outside the normal risk groups, the very young and the very old as well. It's going for young adults, middle-aged people. So that is unusual, and clearly we'll want to find out more about that to see whether this is a genuinely nasty strain or whether there's just a very large number of cases lurking there, and what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg.
Finding out more about it, how critical is that? How critical is it to find the source?
Well, it is very critical to find the source. You know, if one could pinpoint the source, one can then do something about it and be absolutely certain that that source has now been stopped. And of course that's a problem for the Germans. They haven't been able to do that. The Spanish cucumbers, well, you know, they seem to be, as far as one can tell, in the clear. So it may well be some local produce in Germany that's the problem. But until they can find what it is and find out what went wrong, they're still left with this uncertainty as to whether they really have nipped the outbreak in the bud.
Yes, it leaves open the potential for more people to contract it, obviously. But in terms of how it is actually caught, I was talking to Jane Hughes, our correspondent, just a short while ago, and she was making the point that you can, technically, with very close contact, get it person to person.
Yes, we know from past experience that in outbreaks, about sort of maybe 20% of cases are from person-to-person spread. They're usually within families. You know, very close personal contact is required, even although the bug itself is very infectious. You don't need to eat many of them to actually fall ill. But nevertheless, about one in 5 cases in an outbreak will be due to this person-to-person spread. And it's really very important, of course, to advise people about things like hand washing. That's the central thing to prevent the spread of the bug. The bug gets on the hands after you've been to the toilet and so on, particularly people who've got symptoms of gastroenteritis, and then that gets on to other members of the family. And it's usually within children that we have the big problems about person-to-person spread.
You spoke earlier about risk groups. Obviously, it appears that you have to travel to Germany to actually contract this, but within those people that are coming to and from Germany, are there particularly groups that are vulnerable?
Well, the main risk groups are people in these age groups, you know, the very young and the very old. This outbreak is unusual, and it doesn't seem to be targeting the young children. Children under 5 have had a very hard time with this kind of bug in the past. They seem to be escaping it, maybe just due to the nature of the food that's causing the problem. It's not a favourite for children under 5. The elderly, I know some of the fatal cases have been in quite elderly people, and they're very much at risk from getting the complications of E. coli, although it can, as it is in this outbreak, affect any age and cause serious and life-threatening and, in fact, fatal complications.
Just a final thought. I know it's probably slightly outside of your remit, but the Russians have banned all EU imports. The EU said that's disproportionate. Until we find the source of this, could it be that that is a rather prudent move?
Well, it's always very difficult in these kind of situations to separate trade issues from public health issues, and I think the Russians are pushing this, you know, for reasons best known to themselves. We saw this with BSE. You know, it's always a complication of this kind of unfortunate health problem where it spills over into trade issues, and I think the Russians are overreacting on this one. But nevertheless, their public health people might say, well, you know, we're justified. The Germans haven't found what the source is. We buy from Germany, so we're not going to buy. To spread it to the rest of Europe, I think, is a step far too far.